would open up and they would do the lottery again. I think it's how that works. I didn't spend a lot of time researching it because the select board had said they weren't interested, so I didn't waste a lot of time on it. But that is something we can do if you guys feel that that's best for the town, then that's definitely an option we can explore.
So Alex, are you concerned at all about enforcement? Like Chris says he's got 400, but there's only 40 registered. If 360 don't register, you're gonna chase them? How's that gonna work?
So we don't have the ability to because we aren't allowed to know who they are.
Gotcha.
Essentially.
It's like a HIPAA.
Yeah, it's a weird thing. So you're kind of basing a lot of that on the honor system. I think what this ordinance is in place for is mostly the storefronts.
Gotcha.
And, the big thing here, I didn't include the fee schedule stuff with this because that kind of gets into a whole other discussion, but there's an annual fee for a storefront. In Wyndham, the annual fee for a medical store or an adult use store is $10,000 a year.
Wow.
They just went up on that, and we can set that fee wherever we want. So if we want to set that at 10,000, I think that's reasonable. If we want to set it at 15 and make it more difficult to operate or expensive to operate in Raymond, you can do that, or you can go lower. The other thing that's interesting, and we did put it in here, is there is a percentage added to that application or that annual license fee, or maybe the application fee, I can't remember. And that percentage goes into an account which the town uses to donate to like a drug awareness program, essentially, an education program for the schools. So when they're paying their annual fee, they have to also tack on a little extra, which goes towards education. So there's all sorts of different stuff that we can explore with this, and that's just something that Wyndham's doing. And think about all of the stores they have. They're getting 10,000 from each one of those a year, essentially. So
That's all right.
The grow facilities also have to pay that fee?
there is a fee for grow facilities. Yeah, I should have included what Wyndham's are, but I didn't put that on this because I didn't want to.
It seems like a
Well,
substantial...
we're not subject, we don't establish the fees.
Select board will set the
Select board
fees.
sets the
Their
fees,
thing,
so
yeah.
their jurisdiction on
I
it.
think I added fees in here as, at the bottom, established by the select board. I took the fee schedule out and just added that because that is really something they'll have to set once this if it gets accepted.
It seems like that's advisable because if you had a store and you were paying a big, decent sized fee, you'd sort of tattletale on someone who wasn't playing the game correctly.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to push them to really make sure that, their neighborhood dealers are all in compliance. I mean, and it's a market thing too. So if the select board sets it at 2,000 a year, there may be stores in Wyndham that try to relocate to Raymond, which what does that do to our existing commercial, frontage on 302 if it turns into 10 marijuana stores? So that is something that they'll have to kind of weigh here.
Now,
If
can
they
you
set it at 20, we're not going to get any.
Now, can you set it so they have to have just a number per town, or could you set it by distance separating?
I think we could do that too. But the problem with that is when you do the lottery, I think that kind of can make it challenging if you have.
Yeah, I don't know. I just don't see the lottery as I don't know.
It looks very
Because
complicated.
you have to get yourself all set up and then enter the lottery, and if you don't get it, you've got a store,
Right.
established an address.
Because you have to go through the process to have everything complete to submit the application.
Yeah.
So you have to do a lot of work
Yeah.
in order to even
It
put your
doesn't
name
seem
in.
like limiting the number is advisable, and I kind of agree with the select board. They said
Yeah.
that.
So, thoughts on, you guys don't want to do anything outside of commercial and industrial as far as the uses go, or
That would be
just
my
cultivation outside of those two?
Follow the same
Oh.
process as agricultural for the
for
grow?
outside, right?
Yeah.
Agriculture outside. Everything else would be in the commercial and industrial side.
Yeah, because I think we allow agriculture in just about every district, I think.
Processing probably should.
Processing would be commercial, industrial,
Yeah.
definitely. Yeah, just because of the waste and materials that you'd have involved.
Do we want to allow cultivation in commercial? or not allow it within commercial?
I don't see the
We don't have a
harm.
whole lot of commercial
If it's
zone.
if it's inside, it would probably be better. You know, like if you go up 302,
Yeah.
across from that new trailer store, I think that big building there is now all grow
It
facility.
is, yeah, yeah.
You wouldn't know it
You
other
wouldn't
than
know
all
it,
the
right.
transformers outside in the pole.
Yeah, yeah.
Commercial. Well, what's interesting is if you look at commercial right now, it does not have anything in there for permitted uses for agricultural.
Right. There just is so.
I think it's
little
just the land so
Yeah.
scarce, but,
Yeah.
I mean, we definitely thought that regardless, it shouldn't be in the shoreland zone.
Right.
Definitely.
The cultivation.
Need, any of it would,
Right.
shouldn't be in the shoreland zone, just because of the impact.
Yeah, but, I mean, you can have the retail store. I mean,
Right, well, that's gotta be in the commercial.
Right.
Right, so, I mean, just the facility, the growing facilities, we restrict it to outside of shoreline zoning.
mhm.
Even though I think shoreline zoning may allow some agricultural practices.
It does, yeah.
But I don't think that would be one that would be appropriate for the property values and just the general use.
Don't see it.
Well, and also the nitrate that you brought up,
Right,
Yeah.
contaminant.
right,
Like, for most businesses, do they grow the stuff inside usually?
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If they're a serious operation there, it's an indoor grow. I only know of a couple outdoor grows in there. It's
Security
smaller.
is the biggest issue with that.
And that's kind of what I was going towards.
Security, and like we said, is the odors too. I mean, if you're growing it outside, the odors are
And
pungent.
environmental control, they can control the
Right.
climate.
Right.
Right.
That's the
I mean, they usually,
around.
a lot of these facilities, I learned that they bring in CO2 to make the plants grow faster. They'll pump in CO2 to, you know, to enhance the grow. So, I mean, there's like you mentioned.
They're
like,
insane. It's
They
incredible
control the
what's happening.
moisture, they control the temperature, they control the
Sunlight.
oxygen, everything, you know, so. I mean, they're huge. The big thing too is a lot of those grows too are big energy consumption too, so.
Yeah.
They gotta be close, usually they require three-phase power just because of all this stuff they're operating inside the building.
So should we limit growing to just commercial? So that we don't end up with people growing outside and having theft problems and
Oh,
property valuation
I-
issues and...
well, that's up to you. I guess, you know, I think if we had a preference, I think we'd like to see all the grows inside. I just think it's easy to control a lot of the issues that come up with that,
Yeah.
you know, whether it's security.
Yeah.
Because that's another thing that people and residents have concern about. If it's outside, you have that element of people that are gonna come in and try to steal or,
Right,
or
right.
Yeah.
gain access to this stuff, and it just brings an element to a neighborhood that nobody wants.
Right.
Would you
Where if you're an
consider-
inside security facility, that's tremendously reduced.
So we would not consider a greenhouse as indoor.
Well, that's.
Well,
that's-
I think that most of the greenhouses we see now are in warehouses. They're not really like your traditional greenhouses.
But if you put a hoop house up, is what you're probably saying, right?
Yeah, if you had land and you wanted to
Uh,
get a moderate size thing, but I don't know how viable.
We may
it is
need to
commercially.
define that.
Yeah, I think we'd have to
Define-
define that, because if we
define
allow, for instance, agricultural use, we gotta differentiate them
By size.
by size or by character of structure or something.
Well, and what's gonna go into it, you know, like you were saying, the power.
You don't see many hoop houses
Yeah.
growing this stuff. I mean, you see that maybe with caregivers, but not with the commercial grade growth. And I guess if you're a caregiver, that's probably what you do, right? You probably either do it in your garage or or in a green room in
Usually
your
a
home. Or
basement or garage.
again, to be efficient, I think most would want to control as much of the grow operation as possible. When you go to a hoop house or you're outside, you're limiting what you can
Yeah,
control.
that would probably just be limited to a home caregiver who grows a couple plants in his yard.
Right, you know, and if you think about a caregiver at home and the number of plants,
He doesn't need many.
he doesn't, it's not that, a hoop house is not gonna be that big of a deal anyway, it's gonna be
Yeah.
relatively small.
There's now that it's gotten so popular, there is kind of like a craft offshoot, which is like naturally grown
Like your
outdoors.
beer.
You know, that's a market now, where-
Free range?
Yeah, yeah, for real. It's nuts. So I can take that input if you guys want to take a look, and we can kind of follow up at the next meeting and try to dissect this more once you guys have had a chance to.
It's been a good discussion, it's helpful. The only thing I would say coming out of it is we just get good definitions for the different.
Yeah.
Different types of marijuana.
Separately.
Yep.
And also, I have one more question. It sounds like they want us to decide if we want to limit how many of these operations are in the town.
Well, I think I don't know if they want us to decide that. I think they're looking for input.
But either way, they're looking at us for that, where I feel it falls on the person who, the licensee. Because you're going to limit the amount of licenses, and that's really not what we're looking at. They decide how many licenses. So I don't think it's the operation. It's because you have you could have a medicinal, you can have recreational, and that's two licenses. So
Yeah.
that would absorb 2 licenses. So they would really need to figure that out. I think our responsibility is to decide where the different facilities would be.
Yeah, I think we have
exist.
the
I don't know.
environmental concerns and where, I think are what this board should probably focus on.
Yep.
Would a town
Well-
ordinance have any say in terms of size of business, i.e. number of plants on site, or value of product produced per year kind of thing?
I think we could probably limit square footage if that's something you guys are interested in. That would probably be the most realistic way to do that. The plants thing, that would be tough because the growing stages, they might have some in this stage, some in this stage, some in that stage. And I know that's always a topic of discussion because it's based on mature plants, not, seeded plants or whatever. So yeah, I think square footage, if that's a route you guys want to go, could be something we look at. I didn't see any in my exploration of other towns that had anything to do with square footage in marijuana ordinances. There may be something in their land use that restricts it, but
From reading in a newspaper, most of the restrictions, like where they limit the number of stores or
Yeah.
facilities, is only with the recreational stores. Because if it's a warehouse and if it's storing refrigerators or it's growing marijuana, it really doesn't affect the community all that much.
yeah.
As long as it addresses our concerns.
But, Alex, I'm more along the lines of Mark, and kind of what I started talking about earlier, I know the planning board is looked at as, the originator of 95% of the ordinances of the town, so the expertise has always rested with the board. But the decisions that are being made are not planning board decisions.
That's correct, yeah.
They're selectmen decisions.
Yep.
So I don't think it's, what you're looking for from us, you should be looking for from the selectmen. And let them make those decisions and come back with those decisions,
Yep.
and then we'll get them into a working ordinance
Yep.
that fits with their town.
And I think what-
And add what we need on the nitrate and all that where we have the
Yep.
expertise. But the licensing overview of what all this is going to look like, that's selectmen stuff.
Yep.
And it really is kind of a waste of our time to go through and figure out all of this licensing stuff just to have them say yes or no
I
to it.
agree.
So I know we had talked about, probably a bad term, joint meeting, but, we had talked about setting up something, so maybe we want to do an earlier meeting with them to kind of define, to your point, what they really looking for us to do, because like you said, more of this is policy and licensing than
Right.
it is actual technical matters of.
Yeah, and now you could set up a meeting with the whole board, or we could have 1 or 2 reps at the selectmen meeting to say where our expertise is and what we're involved in.
Yep.
But you guys, decide what you want, and we'll get it into an ordinance.
Would you guys, maybe can we come to a consensus? Do you want to all be involved in that discussion, or do we want to just have Bob and maybe one other person, or how do you guys want to do that? Because I could talk to Dawn tomorrow and see if we can get with the select board chair and maybe set something up. And we can have it be full select board, full planning board, or just one of you, 2 of you in the select board, or
But before that step, I don't want to speak for the whole board. So, are you guys comfortable with having the selectmen make these decisions and not?
Yeah.
Is that-
Absolutely.
Sounds good
Okay.
to me.
All right, so that next step would be meeting.
okay.
I mean, the fact that you've got a draft, has the Board of Selectmen seen this yet?
No.
So, that's the other thing, maybe we should share that with them. let them take a look at it, and then we schedule combined meeting.
Mhm.
Okay. Yeah, I can do that.
Okay, so we got not a lot of time here,
Well, okay, I'll do,
7 minutes.
we do the solar.
Did we get solar done in 7 minutes?
Yeah, we'll do solar.
All right, let's at least get that done.
This is a draft that we used, we presented to Poland as well, and it looks at, it's called solar energy systems, and under purpose, Alex and I this afternoon, we're gonna, Kevin, this is really geared to you because I know how you feel about this, but we're gonna exempt home installations from this ordinance, so they will not be part of this. So if it's for an individual use or consumption, then they're not partake. This is really for energy systems that are going back into the, you know, big system, commercial grade systems that are going back into the grid. And it just looks at all the various sizes and everything. Submission requirements are pretty straightforward. Things that we want to see on the plan. I think the fire department is probably going to want to have a little input maybe into some more technical pieces of this. There's, if you look at page 2, this is new from the DP. There's actually a decommissioning bond, and I think we saw that with the last one. But that's going to be directly in the ordinances now. The other thing that we want to make sure of is that I had to review one in Poland, for instance, and it was close to the airport, so we want to make sure that these don't interfere with any aeronautical pathways or anything like that, because there is some reflectivity that may interfere with those, so that's why that's in there. Getting back to visual impact, there's standard information to that. I think that's probably one of the biggest things that we're seeing now from the public. There's concerns about visual impacts, specifically from public ways and public waterways, and making sure we have adequate buffers. If we look at setbacks under E dimensionals, I have 5, but that should be 50. Typically that's the normal setback, but we can set that for anything you feel comfortable with. And then there's just things about impervious surface ratios and things like that. DP has already kind of ruled that they don't count these as impervious surface, but the access roads and all the equipment do fall under that. And then there's a whole bunch of other standards as far as electrical, building, fire code, things like that.
Where is our ordinance on where we can build these?
That would be up to you guys to decide.
Yeah.
And I think we were thinking the same thing. We were
Add
thinking
it,
that probably these are most, you know,
No shoreland.
no shoreland,
Right.
probably industrial, commercial, and the same thing. I think these could be, obviously, we've seen them in the rural. We've got 2 in town
Right.
that are coming forward. Oh, we got 1 in town right now that's in a rural district. But that's why the setback may be a valuable thing. I mean, the standard has been 50, but that doesn't mean if we're in a rural district, we could make them go to a larger buffer. So those are
Yep.
things that we need to have some input on. What's appropriate screening. And I think definitely from a public way or from a public waterway, we want to have decent buffers.
Right.
You know, and then the neighboring sidelines, we can decide that. But I do think that the biggest stigma I've seen is the visual impact from public ways. People driving down a road don't want to see a sea of black. You know, if we had a tree buffer or something between them and the, I know a lot of these initially were going up, were supposed to be in old abandoned farm fields, but we're seeing more and more of these now going into pristine woodlots.
Yep.
So there's an opportunity there to screen them at least, so they don't.
Maybe we should get a section in here for Wayne for his accessibility.
Yeah, oh, definitely,
Yeah.
definitely, that would be something we'd want in here. So that's that one in a gist. And I think the biggest one there is again, buffers and figuring out what's acceptable. So the rest of it's kind of boilerplate. And the next ordinance we had was boat storage, which was really defining.
Yeah, we don't have a definition for boat storage. So for the next meeting, I can probably bring in a definition for that. But again, we're in the same situation where we would need to also plot that into some zones too, and where that would be allowed.
And the issue we have there is, should it be tiered? Because we know You know, some people may have their neighbor's boat or their own boats. I mean, as long as the boats are in your registration, we wouldn't restrict that.
Right.
But if suddenly you're taking your neighbor's boats, you know, okay, when does it become a boat storage facility? Or is there a tiered, is there a low level
number.
and then a major level, a commercial level, you know? Because we see more and more of that now where people are taking boats for friends and things and storing them in their backyard. So just trying to prevent it from getting out of control, basically. Because they do add impervious cover, and then the biggest thing is just making sure that they're not doing anything else. It's not a working boat yard where we're not doing repairs, we're not doing, you know, all the chemical things that you do on a fiberglass and things like that. So that's what we're trying to prevent.
We do have some people in town that are not in commercial, industrial, or shoreland zones. They're in rural residential, village residential, that are looking to try and do boat storage at their house. So that's kind of where the red flag for me came from, where we probably should get a definition, some allowed zones, and maybe some standards so that we have the ability to say, no, that's not allowed in this particular zone, for example. Or else we might end up with them in areas we don't want through conditional use approval through ZBA or something. So.
And the same thing, we don't really have, we could even do a performance standard for those
We
as
might
well.
be able to put a few together, yeah.
But, and I mean, you see that more than the board and I do as far as how many people may have interest in that, but I think we've seen through Naples and up through Bridgeton that there's been quite, if you go on 302, there's been quite an explosion of boat storage facilities. Through this pandemic, boats have become, you know, very popular again.
What is the setback reduction and variance?
So essentially, they're in both the land use ordinance and the shoreline zoning provisions. We allow for a variance and a setback reduction, which is basically a variance with different standards. So one of the things, and is David on the Zoom meeting?
Yeah.
I don't know if he wants to say anything or not, but the ZBA would like you guys to look at that, and I can get you more information for the next meeting on specifically what the issue is. It's kind of confusing for the ZBA because the wording and I can pull it up exactly, the wording in one of them almost basically makes it so you can't get the other one. So the ordinance needs to be tweaked in some way, and it's probably going to require some help from the town attorney because I don't really know what the best solution is, how to fix that. Because people do come in for setback reductions, which is easier to get. So that one I can do a little bit more work on between now and the next meeting and give you guys something to actually make a decision on, because right now you can't really make any decision on
Okay.
it. So, and then visual impacts was the one that you had brought up, Bob.
Right.
And that's and as you and I discussed, that's a pretty subjective, you know, we were kind of discussing it. To us, it almost feels like it falls into the guidelines, you know, with the way this one's written, from a standpoint.
That might not be a bad way to approach it.
It may not be. I mean, this could be attached as part of the guidelines.
Right.
And follow it through that procedure, where it's not necessarily a standard, but it's a go-by guideline for us to follow. Say you could put in the ordinance that for visual impacts fall within the recommendations of the guidelines or something to that effect.
Actually, I think that might be a really good way to do it.
You know, otherwise, you know, as we were talking about, it is one of those subjective things that even when you put a point system on, it's subjective. There's no black and white technical evaluation. It's how do you feel? How do you feel? And you could get 5 or 6 different answers from this board for one thing. But I mean, it's something I think you should look at, and maybe that's a way we can approach it.
So Sandy, that's a what if you could get out to everybody.
I will make sure that it
Thanks.
is, yeah.
And then, so I mean, that may be the way we can just tack that whole, because this comes from the Maine State Planning Office, so we could find a place to put that in that guideline. Accessory residential apartments.
Yeah, that was one that was added from one of you guys. Someone wanted to look at possibly removing
The second structure.
Yeah, not allowing accessory residential
and going
apartments.
back to a single structure.
Yeah. So that's up to you guys. There is basically a performance standard for accessory residential apartments.
And we can, I don't want to hold up the next meeting too much, but that we can just discuss that amongst ourselves in the next meeting.
Yeah.
It'll be a very
Right,
simple
right.
change.
I mean,
Yeah,
it's in or out, right?
Right, it's either one way, it's either, right.
Right,
either
it's in or
or
out. It's nothing that we gotta rewrite, it's just whether it's in or it's out.
Right. Well, you'd have to rewrite it a little bit.
A little
because
bit, right,
You have to put the
yeah.
old one back.
Right.
Right.
And then the last one, well, we have two actually, I think, was lot size reduction. That was the one you found, Mike, with the cluster. And the revision there would be to remove the language about half acre to take it down to 20,000.
And that's more of an admin.
That's
Yeah,
all it is
we'll
really
have that
now.
one.
And the other one we found recently was in the subdivision ordinance, under the street standards. We still have language in there that limits it to 1,000 feet length. But last year we went through and we allowed provisions that you could go longer than 1,000. So the idea is making sure we have correlating language that allows for that additional length as long as you obtain the waiver. So it's really to refer to the street ordinance in that section of the subdivision ordinance rather than have it specific. We just refer to the street ordinance, which allows for the waiver. So it's just a correspondence reference thing to make sure we have it in the subdivision ordinance, because right now it limits it to 1,000 feet. But all along, you have the ability to waive that, but this just now sets up the criteria for what the waiver is, so it's a reference thing.
Okay,
Is there
That's
anything
it.
else?
That's it for now, yeah.
That's it for now.
let's take a couple of minutes break. Kevin, I didn't mean to ignore you on, when we were talking about the marijuana issue. Are you okay with the approach? Yeah, which way we're going?
With what?
Are you, with the marijuana issue, are you okay with the approach?
Oh, yeah, I'm fine with that,
Okay.
yeah, I haven't been,
Okay, so let's just,
although I did have one interesting thing that maybe for the solar or anything that has, a lot of these places, they bring in, the containers, you know, the shipping containers, and they're specific, they're not like storage things, they may put some electronics in them, they may put some control systems in them, they may use them for spare storage of some parts. And the way our ordinance reads, they can't do that. Is that something we should be looking at, the usage of containers, storage containers?
So we
shipping
could look
containers?
at maybe a section maybe that deals with equipment, allowed equipment, and we could write up something with that as long as that stores equipment for the use. Is that what you're getting at, Kevin? Would that be,
Because
are you looking at
we talked
strictly?
that in the past, where we talked about shipping containers are being used for a lot of different things now than just storage. I mean, they're being built, insulated, and used for housing
But if
and
If
shops.
it's used for, it's one thing if it's used for storage, but if it's used for equipment, does that fall under a building code or fire code?
I think it would.
Especially for that type of industry?
Yeah. You would have to meet.
Something we can take a look at, Kevin. We'll
Yeah.
do a little more research into that one for you. And you're talking about not a fixed structure, you're talking about a temporary structure or a trailer, correct?
Well, I mean, it could be put on, when you're fixed.
I understand what you're saying, yeah.
You have a foundation, right?
Yeah, it's gets back to the container use for multiple structure purposes.
Right.
And for you two to give me a little guidance on that one. Okay?
okay, let's end the workshop. And in the back there, do you want to give us like a 2 minutes and then start the planning board?
That sounds good, I'll punch out.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would suggest not, see,
Welcome to the welcome to the December 8th, 2021 Planning Board meeting for the Town of Raymond. The board will come to order. The board does have a quorum, and we're now going to roll call. Start with you, Mike.
Mike Darcantolo?
Greg Foster?
Robert O'Neill.
Ed Kranich?
Mark Childs.
This is a public proceeding, and unless the board specific, oh, I'm sorry.
yeah, just leave me out.
Left you out again, Kevin. What's that thing?
It might not happen.
And Kevin Woodbury is our last member there. This is a public proceeding, and unless the board specifically votes to go into executive session, you have the right to hear everything that has been said and to look at all the exhibits that are presented. Please notify the chair if you're unable to see or hear. The board works from a published agenda, and we'll be considering tonight's items in the following order. We have minutes from the November 10th meeting. We have a project on the table from R.N. Wiley & Sons, and new business, a Sebago Techniques project on behalf of CF Brandon Chase, or excuse me, Brandon Chase Builders. In each instance, the burden is upon the applicant to demonstrate compliance with the provisions of the applicable ordinances or state law. All persons speaking, including representatives of the applicant and members of the public, are asked to stand at the microphone and state their name, address, and affiliation with the application. All persons speaking shall address the chair. Any conversations must be held in abeyance until after the board is formally adjourned. After board votes on the merits of each application, it will prepare a written notice of decision. Because the notice of decision may substantially affect any appeals rights, and also as a matter of courtesy, the board asks that those attending the meeting with regard to a specific application not leave until the board has completed its discussion. Appeals from adverse decisions must be filed with the Superior Court or as otherwise provided by law within 45 days of this board's decision. Also, to be certain that you preserve your individual right to file any such appeal, you must be certain that the board records evidence of your appearance this evening. All right. Minutes from November 10th. Any changes, modifications? Is there a motion?
Motion to approve the minutes?
A second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Kevin? Yeah, done, approved. Unanimous. All right. Next up is our tabled application. So we would need a motion to remove it to the table and bring it back for consideration.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Any discussion? What we're doing? All those in favor? All right, we're back. And Jim, do you want to start us off?
Yes, Mr. Chair, this is back for a final plan review. This is a subdivision located in the Village Residential District. It's been before the board 2 or 3 times, but I think we're at the point now where we're able to make a decision on this as a final plan. The applicant has come back with an amended revised plan. The changes to the plan included revisions to one of the lots, which was originally 20,000 square feet to include now the half-acre sizing, so there was a revision to that. They've included updates to the open space areas, as well as they've added a note which we requested for basins being at least 1 foot above wetland elevation. We have received a letter of financial capacity from Evergreen Credit Union. I believe they're going to update that with an act. I had requested that they put a value to that letter because it was just a generic letter, and I think they've updated that to include 200,000.
Yeah, we did that and sent it over to you.
Okay.
I emailed that out there.
Yep, we got
Okay,
that.
you got that? Okay. And then we've also draft HOA documents, which we will request be notarized or recorded, prior to occupancy. And they did require Maine DEP approvals, which I believe a copy is in your packet as well for the stormwater component. The only thing that I had left, which Dustin, is the last meeting we had talked about at the intersection, installing a light or maybe some signs.
I thought I saw that somewhere. Did you put in there that you're gonna put a light in?
They asked for the waiver of it's an outstanding waiver for the grades next to the intersection, but we had talked about a light installation